"Play, then," he said with a smirk that froze the air. The room held its breath. Crystal glasses paused mid-air. Laughter cut short. Amara's hands hovered above the piano keys, trembling under the chandelier's golden light. Dozens of faces, manicured, powdered, smug, watched her like a spectacle. The grand piano gleamed like an open wound. Then silence. A breath. The first note. It began not with confidence, but with sorrow. A single, fragile sound that seemed too pure for that room of wolves. It floated upward, filling the ballroom with something no one expected. Not amusement, not mockery, but ache. Ethan Voss's grin faltered. The sound blurred, blending into memory, hours earlier, before the silence fell. It was noon when Amara first arrived at the Voss Tower ballroom. Her uniform was crisp, black dress, white apron, shoes polished until her reflection stared back faintly. She carried her cleaning cart like armor, her every step deliberate and small. The gala preparations had already begun. Waiters rushed with silver trays, florists fussed with orchids, and a team of men in suits debated the arrangement of champagne fountains. At the far end, the grand piano sat untouched, a Steinway so pristine it could have been carved from moonlight. "Be careful near the piano," barked Clara, the event manager, her clipboard snapping like judgment. "That thing's worth more than your annual salary." "Yes, ma'am," Amara murmured. Her eyes lingered on the piano, not with longing, but with something quieter. A memory. The smooth ivory under her fingers. The smell of her mother's perfume beside the bench. Her teacher's warm encouragement echoing, "You play like the world is breathing through you." But that was years ago, before hospitals, before bills, before silence became survival. Now she wiped marble floors and dusted frames of men who'd never learn her name. Ethan Voss arrived later that afternoon. Cameras followed him through the revolving doors. 6'2", tailored charcoal suit, watch worth a small fortune, his hair slicked back, jawline sharp, every step heavy with ownership. He wasn't born rich. He became it, and wore it like armor. The whispers said he'd fired half his staff once for a delay in a product launch. To him, mistakes were weakness, and weakness was death. When he entered the ballroom, conversation stilled for a heartbeat. The staff straightened instinctively. Amara bowed her head, clutching her cleaning rag as though it could make her invisible. Ethan's blue eyes flicked across the room, stopping briefly on her. "You there," he said. Amara froze. "Sir?" He pointed toward the floor. "That corner's streaked. I can see it from here." "Fix it." "Yes, sir." He didn't wait for an answer. He was already walking away, greeted by investors and models, all eager for a word, a laugh, a glance. The world bent for him, and he moved like he knew it. Amara crouched to polish the same corner twice, her reflection shimmering faintly in the tile. Around her, the hum of wealth continued. Champagne clinks, laughter, perfume, the sound of a life she'd once dreamed might include her. By evening, the ballroom bloomed with guests. Strings of gold light hung like constellations, and the city sparkled beyond the glass walls. Amara stood near the kitchen door, serving canapés, her movements steady but her eyes distant. On stage, a jazz trio played softly. Ethan mingled, smiling that effortless smile that hid nothing kind. Every now and then, his gaze drifted toward the piano, untouched amid the music. "Still waiting on the pianist?" One executive joked, Cancelled last minute, said another. Traffic on 5th. Ethan chuckled, bored. Maybe one of the staff can fill in, the men laughed. Maybe the maid, one said, nodding toward Amara as she passed. She's been eyeing that thing all day. Ethan's grin sharpened. Has she now? Amara stopped, startled, her tray trembling slightly. I wasn't, sir, she said softly. Oh, come on, Ethan said, voice low but loud enough for the table to hear. A piano that costs more than her yearly wage. Wouldn't you like to try it? Give us a show, maybe? The laughter that followed was warm only for them. Amara's heart thudded painfully. I'm not. It's not my place, sir. Oh, nonsense. Music is for everyone, isn't it? Ethan teased. Go on. Play us something. A lullaby, maybe? The crowd leaned in, curious, cruel, expectant. She wanted to disappear, but something inside her, the small, trembling part that remembered who she'd been, refused to bow. Her fingers itched, remembering keys long left behind. Slowly, she placed the tray down, walked toward the piano. Whispers followed her. She's really going to do it. This should be funny. Hope she doesn't scratch it. Ethan smirked, folding his arms. Let's hear it then, she said. The seat was too high. She adjusted it quietly, her breath shaking. The ivory keys gleamed beneath her hands, cool, familiar, sacred. She looked up. Hundreds of eyes waited. Ethan's the coldest among them. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, You shouldn't have asked me to. Her fingers fell. The first chord was like thunder through silk, deep, rich, aching. The laughter died instantly. The melody unfolded, Rachmaninoff's prelude in G minor, a piece of fury and grief, precision and fire. Her small frame moved with it, her face soft but her eyes fierce, glowing with something that silenced the air itself. Ethan's smirk slipped. The crowd leaned forward. The notes climbed higher, trembling with beauty, until even the chandeliers seemed to hold still. By the time she struck the final chord, tears had welled in eyes that had never known humility. The silence afterward was alive. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sound lingered in his chest like confession, and for the first time in years, the mighty CEO of Voss Technologies had nothing clever left to say. The applause came slowly, hesitant, reverent, until it became thunder. Amara stood, trembling, and met Ethan's gaze. No words, just the truth that he'd mocked her, and she'd answered with art. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She turned and walked away, her uniform still neat, her back straight. For once, the silence belonged to her. The applause had faded into whispers, and the gala ended in uneasy quiet. The guests drifted out into the cold Manhattan night, murmuring, replaying, trying to explain what they'd just witnessed. None could. They'd expected embarrassment. They'd witnessed brilliance. But inside the ballroom, beneath the fading chandeliers, Ethan Voss stood still. The piano lid gleamed in front of him, open like a mirror. In its reflection, he saw not the billionaire, not the master of the evening, but a man caught unprepared. Her music still echoed faintly through the hall, and something inside him, something long buried, stirred. He loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. Bourbon, neat. It didn't help. Across the room, Clara, the event manager, barked orders to the cleanup crew. Come on, people. We've got 2 hours to clear this mess. Amara was there too, back in her apron, silently stacking plates as if nothing had happened. Her eyes were swollen but calm, her movements methodical. She avoided looking at him. When Ethan finally walked toward her, the sound of his shoes on marble made her flinch. "Amara," he said quietly. She straightened, hands clasped. "Yes, sir?" For a moment he said nothing. Then, the only words he could summon, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. "It was a long time ago, sir." "Juilliard?" Her eyes flicked up, surprised. "Yes, sir, for a while." He nodded once, as though that answered everything. But inside, he felt something unfamiliar. Regret. "I didn't mean," he began, but she shook her head gently. "You meant to," she said. Her tone wasn't bitter, just true. "You were trying to be funny." The words landed like glass breaking softly. Ethan exhaled. He was not used to being told the truth, especially not by someone who polished his floors. She turned to leave, her cart squeaking faintly against the tile. But before she vanished through the service door, he called after her. "Don't quit." She paused. "Wasn't planning to." Then she was gone. The next morning, the incident was everywhere. The Maid Who Played trended on social media. Someone had recorded the moment. Her trembling hands, the stunned faces, the silence after the final chord. It went viral overnight. Headlines bloomed. Billionaire's Maid stuns gala crowd. With virtuoso piano performance, CEO's mockery turns to awe. Who is Amara Bell? From cleaning floors to Carnegie dreams, Ethan saw them all before breakfast. His PR manager, Mark DeLuca, was already pacing his office, waving a tablet. "Ethan, this thing's huge." The clips hit 12 million views. "Everyone's talking about how you discovered her." "I didn't discover her," Ethan said dryly. "Well, you should say you did," Mark insisted. "We can spin this. Make it a story about opportunity, inspiration. You saw potential in your staff, right?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." "Doesn't matter," Mark said. "What matters is narrative. You look good if you—" "Stop." The word was quiet, but sharp enough to freeze the air. Ethan stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked out over the skyline. The city glittered below like a field of diamonds, uncaring. "Set up a meeting," he said. "With her," Mark blinked. "The Maid?" "Yes, Mark. The Maid." Amara wasn't hard to find. She was in the staff wing of the penthouse, polishing glassware, pretending she hadn't seen the notifications flooding her phone. Her cousin had texted, "Girl, you are everywhere." She'd silenced it, heart pounding. The world's attention terrified her more than Ethan's cruelty ever had. When Clara appeared in the doorway, hands on hips, Amara braced herself. "The boss wants to see you," she said flatly. Amara's stomach dropped. "Now? Now." Ethan's office was made of glass, one wall overlooking the city, another covered in digital art that shifted like waves. When she stepped inside, her reflection shimmered in every direction. One woman, multiplied into infinity. He rose from behind his desk. "Amara, sit." She hesitated before perching at the edge of the chair. He studied her, not the uniform, but her. The small hands folded in her lap, the quiet strength in her stillness. "Do you know how many people are talking about you today?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't want them to," he frowned. "Why not?" "Because it wasn't meant to be a performance," she said softly. "It was just me trying to breathe." Something about that hit him like a confession. "Why did you stop?" he asked. "Playing?" She nodded. She looked down, voice steady but thin. "My mother got sick. I couldn't afford tuition anymore." Cleaning paid faster than concerts. Ethan leaned back, silent. He'd spent his life buying everything he wanted. The thought of someone having to trade talent for survival unsettled him in ways he didn't understand. "I humiliated you," he said finally. "Yes," she said quietly. "The honesty made him wince, and you made me look small in front of everyone." She looked up at him then, her gaze gentle but unflinching. "No, sir. I made you listen." The silence that followed was heavier than any boardroom deal he'd ever closed. He stood, pacing once before stopping near the window. "I want to make this right. I can—" "Please don't," she interrupted softly. "Not for guilt." He turned. "You think I'm doing this for guilt?" "I think you're not sure why you're doing it at all." Her voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. Like truth again, unadorned, Ethan exhaled, shoulders sinking. For the first time in years, he looked human. "I want to help you get back to music," he said at last. "Whatever that takes, school, piano, concerts, I'll fund it." Her eyes widened. "Why?" "Because you deserve it," he said simply. "And because maybe I don't." She didn't answer right away. Her heart wanted to trust him, but her scars warned otherwise. "I'll think about it," she said. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Thank you for saying sorry." He nodded, but there was no relief in his expression. Only the ache of a man realizing that money couldn't mend what pride had broken. When she left, he stood by the window long after the door closed, watching her small reflection vanish down the corridor. Somewhere below, in the vast hum of the city, a piano note still lingered, haunting him like a ghost. The story didn't fade. It grew. By the end of the week, Amara's face was everywhere. News anchors replayed the video. Journalists called her the mystery maid with the soul of a virtuoso. Bloggers dug through her past, old performance photos, competition results, even her unfinished Juilliard profile. Everyone wanted a quote, a reaction, a new soundbite to feed the story. Amara wanted silence. She kept working, quietly, sweeping hallways and polishing mirrors. But every time she entered a room, conversations paused. The kitchen staff whispered about her. Guests stared. Even the elevator attendants offered hesitant smiles, unsure if they should speak. The viral fame felt less like celebration and more like exposure. The whole world had seen her heart, and she hadn't meant to show it. Ethan Voss watched it unfold from his office tower like a man trapped in his own empire. Every article, every repost, was a reminder of the moment he'd made himself the villain. "Boss," Mark said, barging in again, "we've got morning shows calling for interviews. They want you and her together. Redemption story, good optics, a soft side for the brand." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You think this is about optics?" Mark blinked. "What else would it be about?" Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the tablet, the frozen image of Amara at the piano. Her hands curved above the keys, eyes half closed. He hadn't stopped hearing that sound. "Tell them no," Ethan said finally. "She doesn't owe anyone a circus." "Then what's the play?" Mark demanded. "Because right now, half the internet thinks you're a saint, and the other half thinks you're a bully." Ethan leaned back, voice low. "Maybe they're both right." Amara's phone buzzed constantly. Calls from unknown numbers, messages from strangers offering money, lessons, sponsorships. It should have been a dream, the kind of miracle that changes everything, but it felt wrong. Too sudden, too exposed. Late one night, she sat in her small apartment, walls lined with thrift store furniture and half-wilted plants. On the counter sat her mother's framed photo, smiling with the same quiet strength Amara wore like armor. She whispered, "You'd tell me to play again, wouldn't you?" Her mother's voice seemed to echo from memory. Play when they're listening, and play when they're not. So she did. At midnight, she pulled her keyboard from under the bed, wiped the dust off, and let her fingers wander. The sound filled the apartment, tender, lonely, honest. A melody no one would ever hear. For the first time in years, she played without fear. Days passed. Ethan tried to return to business, but his empire suddenly felt smaller. Board meetings dragged. Deals bored him. His penthouse, once a monument to success, felt like a cage. Every time he passed the piano in his living room, he stopped, looked, walked away. Until one night, he didn't. He sat at it, poured another drink, and pressed a single key. The sound echoed too loud in the quiet. Then another, then a third, uneven and halting. He wasn't playing. He was remembering. His mother had played once, softly, on rainy evenings when he was small. Her favorite piece was the same one Amara had performed, the prelude she'd loved, and he'd long forgotten. His throat tightened. He hadn't thought about her in years, not since the accident, not since he'd learned that wealth could bury grief, but never heal it. That night, he dreamt of Amara's music, her trembling hands, her steady eyes. When he woke, he knew what he had to do. The next morning, the company announced a charity gala. Voss Foundation for the Arts. Scholarships for young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. Ethan's idea. Mark blinked when he heard it. "Wait, you want to fund music students now?" "Yes. Since when do you care about art?" "Since someone reminded me what it sounds like." He didn't need to say her name. When Amara was called to Ethan's office again, she half expected another awkward apology. But this time the room looked different. Papers scattered across his desk, blueprints of a stage setup projected on the wall. He gestured to a chair. "You're part of this." "Part of what?" He leaned forward. "The Voss Foundation. It's real. I want you to help design the first concert. Scholarship fundraiser for musicians like you." She blinked. "You want me to organize it?" "Yes," he said. "And to play," Amara froze. "I can't play in front of them again." "You already did," he said quietly. "And you made them listen." She looked down, twisting her hands. "They laughed at me. They won't again." Silence. Then she said, "And if they do, then they'll answer to me." His voice was steady, almost gentle. Not a command this time, but a promise. She studied him, unsure what to make of this changed man. The cold edge was still there, but beneath it, something new flickered. Sincerity. Maybe even guilt softened into care. "I'll think about it," she said. "You always do," he replied with a faint smile. "And you always decide right." That night, as she walked home through the glowing city streets, Amara passed a cafe with a dusty upright piano by the window. A small crowd had gathered around a teenage boy playing clumsily but joyfully. She stopped, watching. When he finished, she clapped softly. He grinned. "You play?" She hesitated, then smiled. "A little." The boy stood. "Then go on." She sat, hands hovering above chipped ivory keys, and for the first time in public since the gala, she played again. Nothing fancy, nothing perfect, just a lullaby her mother used to hum. The boy listened, wide-eyed. A few strangers stopped to film, but this time she didn't mind. The sound rose through the night, gentle, healing, free, and somewhere across the city, in a glass tower that glittered against the stars, Ethan paused his meeting mid-sentence, hearing faint piano notes drifting from the streets below. For the first time in years, he smiled without forcing it. He didn't know it yet, but the real reckoning was coming. The next gala would change both their lives again. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The Voss Foundation Gala will begin in 5 minutes. The voice over the loudspeakers echoed through the grand Metropolitan Hall, an ocean of chandeliers and crystal. Cameras lined the walls, the air shimmered with money and attention. But behind the velvet curtains, Amara Bell stood frozen, hands clasped tightly, pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. Her reflection stared back from a tall mirror. Not the maid's uniform this time, but a flowing ivory gown that shimmered with soft gold undertones. It was beautiful, elegant, foreign. Her curls framed her face freely, and her eyes, dark, luminous, carried every storm she'd weathered. She wasn't sure how she'd agreed to this. The press had called it the Redemption Gala, where the billionaire who mocked his maid would launch a charity for young musicians, with the same maid performing center stage. A month ago, the thought would have terrified her. Tonight, it still did. But something in her had shifted. She wasn't here to play for him anymore. She was here to reclaim what he'd tried to take. Her voice. Behind her, Ethan's voice broke through the murmurs. "You look extraordinary." She turned. He stood in a black tuxedo, crisp and understated, but his usual armor, that cold, commanding energy, was gone. He looked nervous, almost human. His blue eyes softened when they met hers. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I've been thinking about that night. I keep replaying it. I don't even know what made me say those things." "You do," she said, not unkindly. "You wanted to laugh, and I was the easiest target." He winced. "I was cruel." "You were human," she replied. "But humans can change. I'm here to see if you did." The words stunned him, not because they were harsh, but because they weren't. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure tonight proves it." She gave a faint smile. "No, Mr. Voss, I'll make sure I do." The curtains parted. The crowd applauded as Ethan stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed. Journalists leaned forward. He smiled, but his usual confidence was replaced by something rawer. Humility. He gripped the microphone, his voice echoing across the hall. "Good evening. A few months ago, I made a mistake. One I'll never forget." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "I stood in a room full of people I respect, and I mocked someone I didn't understand, someone I thought was beneath me." He paused, his voice tightening. "But that person reminded me, with grace I didn't deserve, that talent, dignity, and worth don't come from titles or wealth. They come from the soul." Every eye was on him now. He looked toward the wings. "Tonight, I stand here not to introduce an employee, not even a pianist, but an artist. Please welcome Amara Bell." The applause was immediate, thunderous. Not the forced politeness of high society, but genuine anticipation. Amara stepped into the light. For a moment, the sound overwhelmed her. Then she saw Ethan step back, giving her the full stage. No words, no directions, just space. She sat at the piano. Her fingers rested on the keys. The lights dimmed. The hall fell into breathless stillness. And then she began. This time, it wasn't Rachmaninoff. It was her own composition, a melody built from fragments of grief and rebirth, soft notes rising from the depths, turning slowly toward light. It began with mourning and ended with defiance. Every chord told her story. The mother she'd lost, the dreams she'd buried, the night she'd been mocked, and the moment she took it all back. The music swelled, shimmering like dawn. When she reached the climax, the hall seemed to pulse with it. Even the chandeliers trembled. Ethan stood off stage, his chest tightening, his throat burning. Her sound was more than beauty. It was truth. Halfway through, she glanced toward him briefly, just once. He wasn't the man who'd humiliated her anymore. He looked like a man being remade, brick by brick, note by note. The last note faded into silence, and in that silence, hundreds of people stood, not in judgment, not in pity, but in awe. Applause erupted like thunder. Amara rose, hands shaking, heart racing. She bowed once, then stepped aside as Ethan returned to the microphone. But instead of speaking to the audience, he turned toward her. "Amara," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I need to say this, not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, but as a man." She blinked, confused. The crowd hushed again. "I'm sorry," he said. The words cracked. "For every moment I made you feel small, for thinking your silence meant weakness, for using laughter as a weapon." The room went still. "I thought power meant never being wrong," he continued. "But power without empathy is just fear wearing a suit. You taught me that." He turned to the audience, voice breaking. "If any of you saw what happened that night and laughed with me, I hope you're listening now. Because this woman deserves every stage in the world, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she gets them." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone in the front row began to clap, then another, and another, until the whole hall stood again. Not for the billionaire, but for the maid who'd made him kneel with grace alone. Ethan's eyes glistened. He lowered the microphone, unable to continue. Amara looked at him for a long moment. The man who had once been her humiliation, now standing in front of her as her defender. She stepped forward, laid a gentle hand on his arm, and whispered, so only he could hear, "You've said enough. Let the music finish it." He nodded, tears threatening to fall. And when she turned back to the piano, the lights caught her just right. Gold against brown skin, soft curls haloed in light, as if the world itself had decided to listen again. Her second piece was simple, a slow, tender lullaby. The kind you play for a wounded heart, finally learning peace. When it ended, Ethan was crying. So was half the room. No one moved for several seconds. The billionaire had been silenced again, but this time not by shame, by reverence. The sound of applause lingered long after the music stopped. It wasn't polite or rehearsed, it was grateful. It came from a place deeper than admiration, from hundreds of people feeling, for the first time, that they had witnessed something real in a room built on facades. Flashes from cameras lit up the stage like lightning. The journalists who'd come to feed on scandal were now weeping into their notebooks. And at the center of it all stood Amara Bell, still trembling slightly, her palms pressed together in disbelief. Ethan Voss stood beside her, eyes wet, his usual composure undone. When she looked at him, she didn't see the man who had mocked her anymore. She saw a man stripped bare before the truth. The applause didn't stop. The next morning, headlines flooded every corner of the internet. The billionaire who apologized in tears, from Maid to Maestro. Amara Bell redefines. Grace a symphony of redemption. Inside the night, Ethan Voss. Changed everything. Clips of the performance looped endlessly online. Her song, the one she'd written herself, was downloaded and shared millions of times. Artists called it the most human sound of the year. And everywhere people spoke of that moment, when a room full of power had bowed, for once, to humility. But behind the flash and fame, Amara's world shifted quietly. She no longer cleaned halls or folded linens. Instead, she found herself in meeting rooms, planning scholarships and outreach programs for underprivileged youth. The Voss Foundation for the Arts was real now, and her name was on every letterhead. Still, she stayed humble. She refused interviews that sought pity. She declined branding deals. "I just want to make music," she said, "not headlines." Ethan, true to his word, didn't try to control her story. He funded the programs but never took credit. He appeared at press conferences only when asked, always redirecting attention back to her. It baffled his peers. It even annoyed some of them. "Ethan, you've gone soft," one investor teased at a board meeting. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally learned what strong actually looks like." They laughed uncomfortably. He didn't. Weeks passed. The world moved on to new scandals, new sensations. But for Ethan, something inside remained undone. He'd built empires, launched satellites, and outmaneuvered rivals. Yet none of it compared to the peace he'd felt that night when Amara played. He visited the Foundation's rehearsal hall often, always unannounced, sitting quietly at the back. He never interrupted, never imposed. Sometimes Amara noticed him. Sometimes she didn't. One afternoon, she called him out on it. "You come here like a ghost," she said with a small smile. "If you're going to haunt me, you might as well help tune the instruments." He chuckled. "I just like hearing it. You make this place sound alive." "It's not me," she said. "It's what we built." He looked at her. Really looked. "No, Amara, you built it." Her gaze softened. "Maybe. But you listened." It was a simple exchange, but for Ethan it carried the weight of absolution. Later that month, the Foundation hosted a small student recital, the first of many. The audience was modest, families, teachers, a few donors. Nothing grand, but the energy was pure, electric with hope. Amara watched from the wings as a shy 10-year-old boy performed his first piece. His hands shook at first, but by the end, his music filled the hall with light. When he finished, the applause nearly lifted him off the bench. Ethan leaned toward her, whispering, "That was you once." She smiled. "Maybe it'll be him someday." But redemption, even the sincere kind, doesn't erase all wounds. A few guests still whispered behind her back. "She was a maid, wasn't she? He's just using her to look good." Do you think she forgave him for real? Amara heard every word, though she never showed it. After the recital, she lingered in the empty hall, tracing her fingers along the piano's edge. The silence was soothing now, no longer suffocating. Ethan entered quietly, still in his tailored suit, jacket draped over one arm. "They'll always talk," he said softly. "I know." They don't understand you. They don't need to. He watched her for a long moment. I used to think silence meant weakness, he said. Now I think it's power. She turned to face him. It's peace, she said. And peace is rarer than power. He smiled faintly. I envy you, then. You don't need to, she replied. You just need to listen. Her words hit him like music again, gentle, precise, undeniable. He stepped closer, his voice low. Do you think people like me can really change? Amara's eyes softened. Only if they stop asking and start doing. He nodded, a quiet vow forming in his heart. Over the following months, Ethan did exactly that. He transformed parts of his corporation into community-driven ventures, tech programs for inner-city schools, job placements for low-income youth, even art therapy centers for children. He never branded them under his name. Only one small inscription appeared on every plaque. In honor of those who taught me to listen. And every time Amara saw one, she smiled. Not because she'd been thanked, but because she saw the echo of something she believed in. Growth. One evening, long after the last student had gone home, Ethan found Amara alone in the rehearsal hall again. She was sitting at the piano, playing softly, eyes closed. The melody was familiar. The lullaby from the gala, slowed down, almost whispered. He stood there silently until she finished. That one again, he said. She smiled faintly. It's for someone who still needs forgiveness. He exhaled, voice trembling. You mean me? She turned toward him. You've already got it. For the first time since they'd met, Ethan's composure broke entirely. He covered his face with his hand, shoulders shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like glass. You don't know how heavy it's been. Knowing I hurt you, knowing I turned something beautiful into something cruel. Amara rose from the bench, crossed the room slowly, and stood before him. Then stop carrying it. She placed a hand on his chest. Steady, forgiving. It's done, Ethan. You learned. You changed. That's what matters. He looked down at her, eyes wet, lips trembling with something like gratitude. You're the strongest person I've ever known. She smiled softly. No, I just remembered how to play. The silence that followed was tender. Not awkward, not weighted. Just stillness between two people who had finally found peace where once there had been pain. Outside, the city glowed like a quiet symphony, and somewhere deep in that light, the faint echo of a piano carried upward, reminding them both how far they had come. Rain fell in slow silver sheets over Manhattan that night. The city lights blurred into soft halos through the drizzle, and the marble steps of the Voss Tower shimmered with reflections of passing cars. Inside, the grand atrium had been transformed into something entirely different. Not a gala this time, but a memorial concert. It was Ethan's idea, to honor his late mother, Marianne Voss, who had died 10 years earlier, but whose name had long been overshadowed by his corporate legacy. The event would raise funds for the Marianne Voss Foundation, aimed at supporting underprivileged artists. A continuation of Amara's work, now expanded. And at the center of the evening's program stood one performance. Amara Bell's return to the stage. Ethan stood by the tall windows, adjusting his cufflinks nervously. His reflection stared back, still handsome, still commanding. But there was something gentler in his posture now, something that hadn't been there before. He caught himself pacing. She's late, he murmured. She'll come, said Jordan, his assistant, smiling slightly. "She always does." He tried to act calm, but his heart betrayed him. It had been almost a year since that first gala, and in that time, Amara had grown into something larger than he'd imagined. Not just a musician, but a mentor, a quiet force for change. And though she often kept her distance, there was a connection between them that neither had dared to name. When she finally arrived, the room shifted. Amara entered in a simple black dress, elegant yet understated. Her hair was styled in soft curls, and her hands clutched a small folder of sheet music. There were no diamonds, no entourage, just her calm presence, her eyes deep and composed. Ethan felt something inside him still. "You look beautiful," he said quietly when she approached. She smiled faintly. "And you look terrified," he laughed under his breath. "You're not wrong," she tilted her head. "Relax. You've done good things, Ethan. Tonight isn't about guilt. It's about grace." Her words grounded him. As always, the hall filled quickly. Guests from across the world attended, philanthropists, artists, critics, and media figures. But unlike before, the air wasn't heavy with judgment or spectacle. It was reverent. The story of what Amara and Ethan had built had become something of a quiet legend. The ruthless CEO redeemed by a Maid's music. As the lights dimmed, Ethan took the podium. He began simply, "Tonight is for my mother, a woman who believed that the worth of a person is not what they own, but what they nurture." He paused, glancing toward Amara in the wings. "I lost that truth for a long time, but I had the privilege of being reminded by someone who came into my life when I least deserved grace." There was a murmur through the audience. Ethan's tone was soft, stripped of performance. "She taught me that beauty doesn't ask for permission to exist. It just does. And it can come from anywhere, even from someone the world refuses to see." He looked directly at her now. "Amara Bell, this night belongs to you," the crowd applauded. But it wasn't for him. It was for her. Amara walked to the stage, head bowed slightly, and took her seat at the piano. The spotlight found her, warm and golden. She closed her eyes, hands hovering over the keys. When she began to play, the music was unlike anything she'd ever performed before. It was both sorrow and joy, memory and forgiveness. The first notes were quiet, like whispered prayers, but they grew, steady, powerful, alive. It was her story, their story, turned into sound. Midway through, Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. Around him, guests were transfixed. No one moved, no one whispered. Even the cameras seemed to fade into reverence. Then, near the end, Amara did something unexpected. She stood. Leaving the piano mid-song, she looked out at the audience and spoke. "When I first came to this house," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I was invisible. I was the girl who polished floors and emptied trash bins. And yet, every night, I dreamed of this." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. I don't say this to shame anyone. I say it because too many people still believe they must stay small, that they must keep their gifts hidden because of where they come from or what uniform they wear. Her eyes found Ethan's. But you can't hide light forever. It will find its way through any crack, even in marble walls. The audience sat breathless. "And sometimes," she added softly, "even the ones who built those walls learn to open them." Ethan's throat closed. Amara sat back at the piano and finished the piece. A final, soaring note that felt like dawn breaking after a long night. The hall erupted in applause, not thunderous this time, but sustained, heartfelt, rising like waves of gratitude. Ethan was on his feet before anyone else. He clapped until his hands stung, his eyes glistening. When she stood and bowed, their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them that words couldn't name. After the concert, the guests flooded the reception area with praise. Amara tried to slip away quietly, but Ethan caught up with her near the exit. "You were extraordinary," he said. She smiled faintly. "So were you," he shook his head. "No, I just introduced you." Her expression softened. "That's more than you realize." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the crowd fading behind them. The rain had stopped. Outside, the city glistened like new. "Amara," he began, voice low, "there's something I've wanted to tell you." She looked up, expectant. "I don't know if redemption means anything if it ends with silence," he said. "So I'll say it clearly. I love you. Not out of guilt, not out of gratitude, just because somewhere between all the noise, you became the only sound I want to hear." The air between them went still. Amara's breath caught. She searched his face, not for charm or apology, but truth. After a long pause, she whispered, "You took a long time to listen." He smiled weakly. "I had to learn how," she exhaled, a trembling, uncertain, beautiful sound. Then took his hand gently. "We'll see if you can keep learning," she said. The faintest smile broke across her face, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like the one leading. He felt like the one being led, by grace, by music, by the woman who had changed everything. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, but inside the glass tower, there was only warmth, the quiet sound of hearts finally in tune. The world outside the Voss Tower changed quickly in the months that followed. News of the memorial concert rippled across media channels, not as gossip this time, but as a story of rebirth. A CEO once known for arrogance, now an advocate for humility. A maid once invisible, now a symbol of what grace and talent could do when given light. But for Ethan and Amara, life slowed down. Fame had done its sweep. Magazine covers, interviews, even documentaries. And then it passed. What remained was something simpler, quieter, infinitely more real. They didn't move in together or rush into grand declarations. Instead, they spent time learning each other. Not as boss and maid, not even as savior and muse, but as two people trying to understand what love looked like when pride was gone. Ethan had taken up volunteering at the foundation twice a week, teaching young business students about ethics, not profit. It was awkward at first. He stumbled, misspoke, got emotional sometimes, but he kept showing up. Amara continued to teach music, especially to children who couldn't afford lessons. Her favorite student was Malik, a 13-year-old prodigy with fingers that seemed to speak. Watching him reminded her of herself, the ache, the hunger, the belief that maybe one song could change everything. Sometimes Ethan would stand in the back of the practice hall, listening as Malik played. And every time Amara caught him there, he'd smile and shrug, as if to say, "I'm still listening." One crisp autumn evening, the foundation hosted a small dinner, nothing like the galas of the past, just a gathering of staff and students. The building glowed softly in amber light, its glass walls reflecting the skyline like quiet poetry. After dessert, Malik walked over shyly, clutching a small folded note. "Ms. Bell," he said, "I wrote something." "For you," Amara smiled, taking the paper. It was a short poem, written in pencil, crooked but full of heart. "You showed me that silence sings, and even the smallest song can be heard if someone believes it's worth listening to." Amara's throat tightened. She looked over at Ethan, who was standing nearby, talking with some students. When he noticed her expression, he walked over. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the note. He read it, smiled softly, and then looked at her with something that wasn't admiration or desire. It was respect, pure and clear. "He gets it," Ethan whispered. "He does," she said. "They all will one day." Later that night, after the guests left and the lights dimmed, Amara found herself back at the piano. She'd played this one instrument more times than she could count, but tonight it felt different. Not a symbol of pain anymore, but of arrival. She played quietly, her fingers tracing an old melody, one that had started as sorrow and ended as peace. Ethan stood by the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. "You can come closer, you know," she said softly, without looking up. He walked over, his footsteps echoing lightly against the marble. "I didn't want to break the moment." "You won't," she said, smiling faintly. "You're part of it now." He sat beside her on the piano bench. For a long moment, neither spoke. The music filled the room, slow, calm, intimate. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and placed something small beside her on the keys. A simple gold pendant shaped like a treble clef. Amara glanced at it, then at him. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said. "It's not a gift, really. More of a reminder." "Of what?" "That the things we try to bury," he said quietly, "are usually the things that could have saved us." Amara smiled, that soft, knowing smile that always seemed to disarm him. "I'll keep it," she whispered. "Not because it's pretty, because it's honest," he nodded. "That's all I wanted it to be." For a long moment, they sat in silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the city below, the distant rhythm of life carrying on. Months turned into a year. By the next spring, the Voss Foundation had grown tenfold. New campuses opened in Atlanta, Detroit, and New Orleans, all with the same motto inscribed on their entrance walls: "Every song deserves to be heard." Amara's program became the centerpiece of the initiative, offering scholarships, mentorships, and recording opportunities to hundreds of young black musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. Her name was now synonymous with opportunity, yet she still lived simply, teaching, playing, and occasionally disappearing into quiet solitude to compose. Ethan, meanwhile, had transformed his company's culture. The man who once ruled through fear now led through service. He stepped away from boardrooms and into classrooms, donating most of his shares to the foundation. He often said, "I built an empire once, but this is a legacy." Their paths intertwined naturally, gracefully, not out of need, but choice. One evening, as they closed the foundation after a long rehearsal, Ethan lingered by the door. "You know," he said, "you never did finish that song from the gala. The one you started before I made a fool of myself." She laughed softly. Maybe some songs are meant to stay unfinished. Or maybe, he said, stepping closer, they're waiting for a duet. Amara looked at him, eyes shimmering with quiet amusement. You can't even play. Then teach me. There was something so innocent in the way he said it that she couldn't help but smile. Fine, she said. But don't say I didn't warn you. He sat beside her again, clumsy and unsure, pressing random keys. She guided his hands, gently, patiently. Their fingers brushed, lingered, and the air between them filled with that same familiar electricity. As the notes came together, imperfect but heartfelt, Amara looked up and whispered, There, now you're listening. He smiled, eyes glistening. Always. The final chord rang softly, echoing through the empty hall like a benediction, and for the first time in both their lives, silence felt like completion, not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. Outside, the city's skyline shimmered against the night. Inside, two people sat at a piano. No longer a maid and her master, no longer an apology and a wound. Just two souls finally in tune, playing a song the world would never forget.